Welcome to Grow with Purpose. This is the Axiom podcast where we talk about the things facing business owners in their small businesses, medium-sized businesses, family businesses. And today I'm back with Cameron Earhart. So welcome, Cameron.
Thank you. Excited to be here and continue the conversation.
Yeah, so we are continuing a four-part series. This is the third episode that we're doing on partnership roles. And in the first two episodes, we talked about some of the mechanical things about partnership agreements and more technical issues. Today, we're going to shift focus over to philosophical fit, vision alignment, and the things that it's kind of hard to put down on paper. They tend to be conversational, but these are the things that we see come up in partnership situations that we deal with every day. So I'm excited to talk through this with you. And I want to ask first, like, why would two partners have the same vision? Why would that even be important?
Well, when you think about when a partnership starts, when a business starts, typically it's because there's a great idea, or there's just a common shared interest or belief that, hey, we can create something together here and grow it, and so that's enough to spark that flame and get that business started. But then if you fast forward a year, 2 years, 3 years, however far down the road, as that business grows, that business is going to take a certain direction. It's going to be heading somewhere. And so business owners, partners, when they start the business, if they are not intentional about having the conversation of where do we want this business to go, then it might not happen year one, might not happen year two, but eventually they're going to come to a crossroads where they have to figure out, are we on the same page with where we want this business to go? And if they're not having those conversations early, then it could potentially become very detrimental to the long-term success of the company, as you have two partners who are trying to take the company in different directions. So I think it all comes down to assumptions and expectations. And so let's not assume anything, and let's make sure that our expectations are the same. Same thing in marriage, right? Like when you get married, like why do most disagreements or arguments happen? Because of unmet expectations. So what do we have to do? Communicate very clearly. And I think it applies to partnerships and the vision of the company as well.
When you think about the way a lot of partnerships start, like the vision early on is survival. Like it's like, can I
Right.
feed my family? Can you feed your family? Doing what we know how to do together. So let's go into business together. And a lot of times, I think those early partnerships are based on some kind of operations expertise. So, you're good at sales, I'm good at administration. So let's partner up and we can start our own firm. Or you're good at this type of construction, I'm good at the service side of it. So let's go into business together and you can run that side and I can run. But as the business grows over the years and it's successful, and I should say, like, we're probably talking about businesses that are 5 million, 10 million, 50 million. These are not business. They've been around a while. This is not their first 2 or 3 years. And over that time, they've grown and they've been able to bring other people in to handle a lot of those operational responsibilities. So now it's like, well, Cameron used to do sales, but now we have a sales manager that does that. And I used to do operations, but now we have an operations manager or COO that does that. And so now Cameron and I are kind of stepping back and working on other things. And now vision really bubbles to the surface as the thing that if I'm trying to think long-term, bigger picture, you're trying to think long-term, bigger picture, and those pictures are different. Now we start to grate against each other and some of that vision misalignment. And I would say maybe we talk about, like what are the assumptions that you see partners making without realizing it? And maybe that's vision. Maybe one of the assumptions you see some of your client partnerships making is like, well, of course, we're in this to make the most money. Or, well, of course, we're in this to hand this off to our kids. Or, of course, and then there is no, of course. There's like
Yeah.
total misalignment. What do you see?
Yeah.
What do you see in the assumption space that gets in the way of this?
Well, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. The why are we doing this is really important, and that also speaks into, okay, well, what is the end goal? Like, yeah, everyone's heard the saying, start with the end in mind. And so if you have one partner that's like, hey, my end goal is I want to grow this thing like crazy over the next 5 years, sell it for as much as we can, and then I want to ride off into the sunset. And the other partner is like what you said, hey, I'm looking to grow this business, but I want to hold on to it for a long time. And I want to be able to pass it down to my kids. Well, we have very conflicting interests there. And if those aren't addressed early on, then it's going to become a very big problem in the company later, especially in a 50-50 partnership, where you don't have a decision maker who can just call the shots. So stuff like that, I think, is extremely important. But, getting into some of the other items you mentioned, okay, well, we want to grow. Well, where do we want to grow? How do we want to grow? Like, I'm in Tampa. So do we just want to stay local to Tampa? Like, do you imagine us having offices outside of Tampa? So you can go through all these different types of questions about just kind of dreaming and looking ahead of what does the growth look like. And I'll say this, it's not necessarily like we need a vision for the company, but it's not necessarily that, hey, we have to be on the exact same page on every little detail about where the company may or may not go. But I think it's so important to have those conversations to figure out, are you able to discuss these things in a humble way, and are both partners open to potentially the other's ideas? Because if we're starting a company and I say, I imagine this being multi offices across the Southeast, multiple states, and you're like, I never thought of that. That wasn't what I had in my head, but I'm open to that. That could be really interesting. Like, that's a great sign, right? But if we're on two completely different pages about something, that's okay, yellow, potentially red light. We have to stop and cross this bridge before we go any further.
Yeah, I think about there's like the big assumptions that we see them taking for granted, like vision, geographic expansion, exit timelines, that kind of stuff. But then there's also some of the like smaller scale assumptions that you see them making. So, it's like, for instance, one is you might have one owner whose assumption is that, hey, we're in growth mode, so we're going to reinvest all of our profits.
Yeah.
And you got another business owner who's like, we're business owners. We should be taking profits out of this business. And so you have, I've been in situations where, one owner walks into the controller's office, and let's say it's a 50-50 partnership, and says, I need to take $100,000, early from my distribution. And so the controller, that's her boss, so that's what they do. But now the business is indebted to the other owner for $100,000 because we got to keep the distributions 50-50. And now you're like, well, can we afford to give the other business owner $100,000? And and then you go talk to that business owner, and he's like, I don't need $100,000. You know what we could do with $100,000? We could hire that sales manager, base salary that we've really been needing, or we could put 2 more trucks on the road, or and it's like, you guys, when it comes to what's happening with the profits in the business, are on totally different pages.
Yeah.
I've seen this too. I think some of the assumptions can also come down to just how is it that we want to run the organization. I worked with a law firm one time, and one lawyer would have been very happy, 2 partners, one lawyer would have been very happy having like industrial space in the back of an industrial park, because all their business was corporate, contract stuff. They weren't really entertaining clients, that kind of stuff. The other guy wanted the penthouse suite in downtown Sarasota, with all the trappings that said, we're successful. And so when it comes to, it got to the end of a 5-year lease term, it's like, we got to look for new office space. And one guy hires this high-end commercial real estate agent. The other guy's on LoopNet on his weekends trying to find the cheapest deal possible. And, it created this huge rift and just assumptions about what image do we want? How do we want to manage our money? What's most important? And like you said, these aren't necessarily things where you're like, oh, there's a workshop for that, or there's a tool for that, or there's a resource. This is just a conversation that you got to sit down and have with your partner about, like, hey, what do you think about spending $100,000 a year on office space?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think those kind of conversations are so important. How do you feel about debt? Are you comfortable with debt? Do you hate debt? Right?
Yeah,
get on the same page about that.
That's a big one. That's a great example. And I've seen people go, unfortunately, it usually comes to a head when one partner signs them up for debt and the other partner goes livid because, they find out that their name is attached to this. When we talk about partnerships and kind of this whole philosophical fit, let's talk about underlying motivations that partners have, and I'll list a couple, and then I want you to basically say if you were dealing with a partnership and you got a sense that they were on different pages with respect to some of these items, and maybe pick one or two. I would like you to give the audience, like, here's a conversation starter, or here's a way that you could approach this so it's actually healthy and not toxic to the partnership. Yeah. So when we talk about what's underlying the motivations, why did you go into business? Why are you in a partnership with somebody? I mean, one of the easiest is financial. It's wealth, right? So you've got two people who are at the top of their game. They say, hey, let's go out and do our own thing together, and we can take our compensation, plus we can take the profits, because we're generating a lot of the profits in this engineering business or this construction business or this service business, and we could keep that for ourselves, and that would be good for us and our financial future. And there's a lot of businesses, a lot of partnerships that get started because they like the financial end game better than working for somebody else. And you have legacy. There's people who say, like, I want to see, I'd like the company that I started, I like that sign to be up for the next 20 or 30 years. I want this to mean something in this community.
Yeah.
And then you've got maybe more of a lifestyle. Like, I want to be able to drive my own schedule. I want to be able to take a month off if we can afford it in the business. You've got businesses who we work with quite a few businesses who say, I really want to focus on using this business as a platform to reach people, to make people's lives better, to minister to people and meet their needs. And then you've got some people who just fancy themselves business owners. Like, I want to be identified as somebody who is the boss. I want the parking spot in front of the building. I want the trappings of success that I see other business owners having. So if two partners kind of sense, I'll let you pick one of those, but if two partners sense that they're on different pages, how do they even start that conversation?
Yeah, great question. I think it was important to remember, like, shared values. Even if you have shared values amongst the two or multiple owners, that doesn't automatically create shared vision. So when you're sitting down and you're talking about these, we'll just pick, let's go with legacy. So we're talking about legacy. So we're having a conversation. Let's say, two partners, we sit down and we're talking about growing the company. And, I share, hey, my vision for the company is I would love to be able to pass this down to my kids one day. And so that's, I want to grow it. I want to do this for the next 10, 15 years, but I want my kids to come up in the business, and I want this to be handed out. So that's key insight before really launching this company, right? Well, I think some questions that you can work through, some conversations that you can have with your partner in that circumstance is, obviously you need to learn what their vision is, but are they in conflict? So if that business partner says, that's great, hey, I don't have kids, but I'm open to that. I'm open to your kids being involved and taking over the company, but hey, at the end of the day, like, I have to be able to support my retirement and my wife, like, that's one of the main reasons we're doing this. Okay, are those two things in conflict? And they might not be inherently in conflict. And so we just got to process through that. So I think the most important thing is, like, hey, when this is a great question that you can lead with in this conversation is, let's fast forward, play the tape forward. When this is all said and done and we've moved on to what's next in our life, like, what does the perfect ending look like to you? And then talk through that. And you might have different answers. That's completely okay. Are those answers in conflict with each other, or could they potentially complement each other?
Yeah, it's interesting that idea that we could be on two different pages, but they might not be in conflict with each other. It's kind of like we go back to kind of how we started. Obviously, there's two different roles that a lot of partnerships start. One's sales, one's operations, or one's operations, one's administration. And those are different, but they're not in conflict with each other. They're actually complementary to each other.
Yeah.
And so we can get into these philosophical topics about vision and purpose and why did we go into partnership, or why do we, I think maybe a better way to frame it is, why do we want to decide that future partnership is a great thing together? Because
Yeah.
people change. I mean, some of the groups that we work with, these partners have been together for 20 or 30 years. They're not the same people they were 20 or 30 years ago. So it's perfectly okay to say, how do we want to decide from this day going forward that we are going to work and kind of be on the same page about why we're doing and what we're doing? And one of them may say, well, I'd really like to have my children involved in this business. They're coming out of college, they're working somewhere else. I'd like to get them involved over the next few years. And my dream would be to have them play a role in the leadership of this company. And the other one says, well, that's great. Are they on board with us using this business to reach people, or are they all about the profit? And because that's kind of the culture that we've built here. And that was really important to me when we started. And I know maybe it hasn't been something that's at the top of your list, but it really is at the top of my list. How do you think your kids would feel about that? Like, I think they'd be all over it. Actually, you watched them grow up. They spent a lot of time around your family. That's kind of what they love about this business. And now you're like, this is great, right? We each bring a different side to color in the picture of what this business could look like going forward. And we're able to own, like, hey, my role is to really get my kids plugged into the business, and your role is to really keep carrying that mission torch of what we're about, because that's what my kids are interested in. Obviously, if the kids aren't interested in that, you got a whole other bag of issues to deal with, but it's our story. We can make it up how we want it. It's a happy ending. Well, we kind of talked about this. I shared with Annalise, Annalise, my 10-year-old. We're having a deep
Future CEO.
Yeah, future CEO. No, I don't know. I told her she'd have to work for you first, and she didn't like that idea.
She didn't like that idea?
No,
I got some beef with Annalise.
She's like, can't you just leapfrog me over Cameron and make me his boss? It doesn't quite work that way.
That is the thinking of a true CEO. So I love it.
We were talking last night, and I said, hey, I can't remember what we were talking about. She wanted to, she was like lamenting the fact that she hadn't bought a birthday gift for one of her friends at school. And mom had just had a conversation, like, we can't afford to buy birthday gifts for every friend that you have, at school that has a birthday. And I said, well, what would she enjoy more? Like, you could give her a gift, or you could just write her a note telling her how much she means to you as a friend. And she goes, I think that would mean more, but her birthday was yesterday. And so I got to tell her the story. I don't know if you've heard it or not, but like, what's the best time to plant a tree? The best time to plant a tree is 25 years ago. What's the second best time to plant a tree? It's today. Right? And so we had that conversation, and I think about this in the context of that. Like, maybe we've never had those conversations about vision. And there's a lot of water under the bridge, but what's the second best time to have it? Well, it's obviously now. But give me some context for if we had a perfect world, we would want this conversation to be like pre-partnership, maybe
Right.
like with the spouses, and I've known a few businesses that got started that way, and I think they have a tremendous advantage. But when we talk about let's say we've had that, but now we're down the road like 5 or 10 years, maybe we've never had it. What are some of the situations where that could come up in the business, and they'd be, I'll call them like good excuses for having this conversation? When might this be a good time to surface that conversation again, or maybe for the first time, for somebody who's like, I think we're on different pages and I just cannot find a good entree to have this conversation? What are some of the situations that might force the hand or help them have the conversation?
Well, I mean, to your point, it's as soon as possible. If you haven't had it yet, and if you're listening to this, like, this is that sign, right? Go have those conversations.
Yeah, if you're leaning in, you need to go. You know what you need to do.
Yeah, but I mean, if it's stuff happening within the business, it could be like, hey, we're having a year of explosive growth, or we're needing to hire some real key employees soon. Capital allocation. We're trying to decide where to spend money. Should we take on debt? Like, those are great trigger points. So like, okay, let's maybe take a step back and just make sure we're on the same page here with where we're going, with what the vision of the company is. So yeah, I would say that. And then one other thing I would add to it is, if if hopefully most partnerships are comfortable having these kind of conversations. If not, that's maybe a bigger question mark. But if you start having these conversations and you feel like, man, they're just feel like we're not getting anywhere. I feel like they're not as productive as they need to be, or maybe maybe I'm not the best at trying to navigate through these types of decisions. There is nothing wrong with bringing in a third party. And I'm not, this isn't like a shameless plug for Axiom.
No,
We
go
might not
ahead.
be the
No,
right people for that.
shameless
I
plug
don't
away.
know. but having a third party who has experience in this come in and facilitate those conversations can be incredibly valuable, even if you feel completely comfortable having the conversations, because that person may think of questions or scenarios or topics that you're not going to think of. So that would be my only other piece of advice there. Don't be afraid to bring in a facilitator.
Yeah, I would. Let me ask your opinion on this. What about spouses?
Bringing them into the conversation.
Yeah, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it.
So it depends on the spouse.
Yeah, good answer.
I think it is relative to the situation. I think there's some situations where it makes complete sense. Like our situation would 100%. Let's bring Chaley and Josie into the conversation. I have zero concerns on either side, right? But I've also seen partnerships where, hey, I love you as a partner, but I don't know if I fully love your wife and would be willing to, or your husband, and would be willing to bring them into these types of conversations. I want to hash this out with you first, and then let's go from there. And so I don't know that there's necessarily a right and wrong way. I think that it's relative to the situation. I think it is better and can be more productive and fruitful if the spouses are there, but I can't assume that's, perfect for every partnership. So
yeah, I mean, we're painting with a really broad brush here. So your answer is, I think, it absolutely on point. It depends on the relationship between the parties. Depends on the relationship between the spouses. I think it also can depend. I guess one of the reasons that I asked the question is, I feel like there are some things that the spouse is going to be involved in, whether you want it or not, whether you like it or not. So, like, if you're buying out your partner, then, like, the spouse is going to have tremendous sway in most instances over whether your partner accepts your buyout, right? So do you want to, it's kind of like us, if we are talking to a husband, wife, business owner team, and they are interested in working with Axiom, well, we'd much rather talk to both of them at the same time than put one in the position of having to make our case to the other and trying to figure out, the game of telephone between two different parties with one intermediary. So I think maybe there's some opportunities, but yeah, you have to proceed with caution because, and I know partners who've said, we are going to do everything with our spouses involved, not operationally, but in terms of like our part, like we're going to start this business with our spouses at the kitchen table. We're going to bring the family together if we're ever considering hiring a family member, because that's a really big deal. And then I've also had partnerships where they've agreed, like, there's lots of stuff. I had one particular partnership where the one spouse was kind of okay knowing what was going on in the business. The other spouse, they had had some really tumultuous years, and she essentially asked her husband, I realize that there's going to be stressful times. I realize there's going to be anxiety. I realize there might be financial difficulty. Unless it's going to cost us our house, I don't want to know about it. I would really appreciate if you just shield me from a lot of the stress and stuff that's going on in the business. And so that developed this a little bit of tension because one spouse was perfectly fine asking lots of questions about what's happening and what are you struggling with, and is there anything that you're anticipating or dreading, and the other spouse was like, I don't want to hear any of that. And so the two came together and said, we'd rather our spouses know the same amount than know different amounts. And so would it be okay, like, my spouse doesn't really want to know anything about the business, would your spouse be okay if you didn't talk about the business? And would you be okay if you didn't talk about the business? Because the spouses were friends outside. And, it's just one of those things, like, it's probably better for them to be not knowing a lot or knowing everything, and we got one that doesn't want. And they basically the one partner said, "Oh, my wife is interested if I'm interested, but if I don't share anything with her, it doesn't bother her. So, yeah, that's
Hmm.
fine." And it was just a really interesting scenario where you have to take into account what is the actual situation, who are the people involved. But I think the other side of that coin, I would say, is that if you totally discount that consideration, you're probably it's gonna come home to roost at some point or another. You're gonna be dealing with
Yeah.
that person at a closing table or over a family hire or something, and then it can really go south in a
Yeah.
hurry. We do a lot of work. I'm going to shift gears a second. We do a lot of
Yeah.
work with Christian business owners, people whose faith is a critical kind of element in how they do business. And do you, or where do you, if you do, where do you see like faith driven values creating conflict? Or do you? I'm just
Yeah.
curious.
No, I think the number I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, but probably the number one place I see this is in firing. So so Christian business owners, faith-driven business owners tend to show at times maybe more grace than they should. So you have an employee who's just not performing, not performing, not performing, but you're just so afraid that, oh, if I fire them, that's going to leave a bad stain, a bad mark. It's going to hurt my witness to them,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it may be. And so it's like, all right, well, I'm just going to keep trying to make this work, keep trying to make this work. I'm going to demonstrate my faith and show them a ton of grace. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think a lot of times what they fail to realize is while you're showing this person grace, other employees are suffering because of this person being here. And it might be the most beneficial thing you've ever done for this person to let them go. And so I think that's probably one of the main areas I see it. Whereas I'm not saying if you're not a Christian, you're not as willing to show as much grace, but I've definitely just seen a problem in faith-driven entrepreneurs a little bit more.
Yeah. Not only is everybody else like suffering, but your partner is pulling her hair out because she realizes this person should have been fired a long time ago, and you're just, now you're given the 15th chance for this person to
Yeah.
change their behavior. Yeah, that's a good one. I've seen it. I definitely agree with you wholeheartedly. The if you got one business owner who believes that we're here to care and love on these people, they can keep folks around longer than they should. I think it. I've also seen it in terms of like how much profit is enough,
Hmm.
and so one business owner, and I'm not saying like one has faith, one doesn't. Like they both are are professing Christians, they're believers, they're strong in their faith, and one believes that we should run C12 says a for-profit Christian ministry, and there's no shame in profit, and the other believes that one of the primary functions of business should be to fund philanthropy and charitable giving. And one partner is like, well, you can do that with your profits. Like,
Right.
I really want to grow the profits of the business so that we can either take that money out and build our family wealth or our family charitable giving or our family legacy or secondary businesses, or I'd like to plug that money back into the business. And it seems like you're just intent on getting to this mark in your head of like, we give half of our profits away to ministry, and I don't see that in the Bible anywhere, right? And so I
Hmm.
think those are conversations that are kind of touchy. I would go back to what you said earlier, like, man, if there's a reason to get a third party who can facilitate that conversation and kind of get everything kind of out on the table and sort through it, that's probably when in matters of faith, it can be really difficult because we've both been in situations where people will use scripture or their faith to kind of bolster their point. I'm not saying that's wrong if it's scripturally sound, but we've also seen, things be pulled out of context and
Yeah.
not necessarily consider the partner's point of view. Let's talk as we kind of wrap up. Let's say that we had some partners, they did everything right, right? They had that early conversation. They started off the same vision, same kind of purpose. We're in this for the right reasons. But then you look back like 20 years later, 10 years later, or maybe even shorter, and they're on different pages now. Why does that happen? What what causes people to kind of drift in different directions when it comes to their vision, their philosophy about why they're doing business?
Yeah, I think there could certainly be life changes that could cause that, and then maybe the whole vision just needs to be readdressed. So that could be a circumstance that would tend towards that direction. But I think another one is just maybe you said at the beginning, you figured out early, but then you don't make it an ongoing conversation. You think it's one and done. So it's like, hey, we checked that box, we're good there. But
Mm-hmm.
then as time goes on and you're not continually revisiting it, you're not talking about it. You're not doing annual planning and then tracking your success against that year to year. Then you could get 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road, and you're like, okay, that vision was 10 years ago. Like when we set that, I'm not still there. Are you still there? And so you're on completely different pages. So I think, yeah, there's the life situations, and then the other one is, well, we gotta make it an ongoing conversation. It's not one and done.
That's really good. It's funny. You remind me of Josie and I were going through some coaching, communication coaching, like how to have a healthy marriage. And one of the things that they talked about was like the daily check in, which was like these 7 questions. I'm not going to go through all 7. The last one, and you do like 30 to 40, it'd be like 30 minutes a day. We call it couch time. But the last one was like you each go back and forth, share a wish, hope, or a dream that you
Mm-hmm.
have. And it's really interesting how having that conversation on a daily base really helps you understand what's driving the other person. The other interesting thing is having that conversation on a frequent basis. It gives you the freedom to really share what your heart is.
Yeah.
So I go back to what you said and be like, yeah, you should be doing annual planning and revamping your vision. But if you're only talking about that once a year and you're doing it in kind of a formal setting where this is part of our annual planning routine, and we got a consultant named Cameron who's kind of overbearing in the corner of the room, he's watching us do this, you miss the opportunity to really like hear the heart of your partner. So I imagine a situation where whether it's having a beer together or going out for lunch every once in a while and just saying, hey man, like, what is it, what share with me a couple of things that you'd like to see this business do. I was going to say wishes, hopes, and dreams. I think most of our business owners would roll their eyes and be like, I'm not talking to my partner about wishes, hopes, and dreams. But some version of that. Find a better way to talk about it. But just like, what are you excited about? And not next month, not next year, but like 10 years from now, what are you thinking? What would we become? What should we be shooting for? What is it that you hope that we're able to do? And if you were to have, I would hazard a guess that if you had that conversation 4 times a year with your partner, you'd probably be in the top 1% of partnerships that were on the same page about
Yeah.
what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. Spot on.
Well, this has been an interesting conversation. I'm really excited about the next episode where we talk about exits. We talk about partnerships that are not going to be partnerships anymore because it's something that I think everybody has to deal with, something that you've got quite a bit of experience in. So on the next episode, the final episode of this 4-part series, we'll be talking about that. I would encourage you to go to the show notes where you can download a leadership guide. We're going to be breaking down a lot of the stuff Cameron's been talking about into things that questions you can ask yourself so that you can gauge, like, am I on the same page with my partner? Are there some conversations that we need to have, and how could we have those? So our team's going to put that together. It'll be in a downloadable PDF that you can use to take these principles and put them into use in your business. So thanks again, Cameron. I will see you in a short while in the next episode.
Sounds good.